always need to begin by giving honor to my ancestors upon whose backs much of the wealth of the Western Hemisphere was built. And although our name is, food security is in our name, really what we're working for is food sovereignty. And in fact, when we began our organization in 2006, we weren't really familiar with the term food sovereignty. But we have since grown to understand that the work that we're doing is really much broader than food security. In fact, in our estimation, the concepts of food security, food justice, and environmental stewardship are embedded in the concept of food sovereignty. I'd like to talk to you briefly about some of the things that are happening in Detroit in 2013. In Detroit, we currently have a population of about 700,000 people, which is down considerably from about 1,900,000 in 1950. The city has been considerably depopulated, both as a result of the decline of the automobile industry and as a result in the 1950s and 1960s of white flight, and more recently of black middle class flight. We have a massive unemployment, which is estimated to be anywhere between 18 and 28%. There are no major national grocery store chains in the city of Detroit, with the exception of recently Whole Foods opened, which clearly is not a solution to food access for the majority of Detroiters. So that leaves the majority of the population to obtain their food from gas stations and convenience stores. Much of the so-called food that's sold in those stores are in styrofoam containers, boxes, and packages. The city is, the geographic footprint of the city is about 143 square miles. Of that 143 square miles, about 1/3 of the city is vacant. And again, for the reasons that I stated earlier, the depopulation of the city and also the intentional disinvestment in the city of Detroit. In fact, the reality is, and this isn't talked about a lot, is that Detroit and Detroiters are being spanked. And one of the reasons that we're being spanked is because of the 50-year and beyond struggle for black empowerment in the city of Detroit. Thank you for having the nerve to stand up and to assert our demand for empowerment. That 143 square miles equates to about 130,000 parcels which are vacant in the city of Detroit. About 60% of those parcels are owned by the city government itself. About 80% of the population is African American, and we live in a metropolitan area which is one of the most highly racially polarized areas in the United States. As I mentioned, the city of Detroit now is, as is the case in many urban areas throughout Detroit, being highly gentrified, where we see young white hipsters moving into the inner city, the core of the city, and we see longtime residents being displaced. All of this is happening against the backdrop of one of the most insidious things which has happened in the United States, and that is that the elected officials of Detroit have essentially been disempowered by the appointment of an emergency manager by the governor of the state of Michigan. That emergency manager has powers that supersede the powers of all of the elected officials in the city of Detroit, so effectively the vote of the people of Detroit has been taken away. So against this backdrop, our organization is working for community empowerment and to build resilience. And we do that in several ways. We're working in urban agriculture. We have the largest farm in the city of Detroit, D-Town Farm, which is a 7-acre model organic farm. We work on policy. We were the lead organization in creating the Detroit Food Policy Council. We have a youth program. And one of our major projects now is the creation of a community-owned co-op grocery store, where the money spent in those stores is not circulated within our communities to create empowerment, but is extracted from our communities and taken outside of Detroit to empower the communities that are surrounding us. And so we're very concerned about changing that paradigm, and we think that the co-op model within the context of a capitalist system is probably the best option that we have. We are also very concerned about creating democracy, and not the kind of bourgeois democracy where you vote for Heckle or Jekyll. But we're concerned about the type of democracy where people are actually making decisions that impact their own communities and their own lives. The other big thing that we're fighting for in Detroit is what we call land justice. Because of the massive amounts of land, vacant land in the city of Detroit, you can imagine that Detroit is ripe for land grabs. And many of you heard that last year there was a massive struggle in the city of Detroit around the proposal to sell 1,700 parcels to John Hance, a wealthy Detroiter. Finally, I'll end by saying that we are fighting all of these struggles against the backdrop of these twin evils. The C word, yes, I'll say it, Raj, capitalism, and white supremacy, which, as Eric said yesterday, manifests not only within the dominant industrial food system, but also manifests within our food movement and within the food sovereignty movement. And so we are concerned that we are all engaged in this work of divesting ourselves of internalized racial oppression. And in fact, it's not auxiliary to the work, but as Eric said yesterday, this is the work. Thank you.